The 1928 presidential election was between Herbert Hoover and Al Smith. Neither one of them particularly popular with their parties, and Al Smith was a Catholic, and nobody in the South would vote for him, so Herbert Hoover won in a landslide. And he ran on that I'm a very successful businessman, and he was, and that he will run the country as a business. And so when he got elected president, he decided the smart thing to do was to bring in all these very successful businessmen to be on his cabinet. And he did. And his cabinet became known as the Millionaire Cabinet. So, of course, these guys come in. The country's been on a tear. The roaring 20s were the roaring 20s economically. And then, of course, we had the crash in 1929. We can argue about what it was for, but trust me, everybody, Democrats, Republicans, communists, Ku Klux Klan, it didn't matter. Everyone believed that it was because we didn't have a balanced fiscal budget. Okay? So, first the crash comes, and then the economy starts going down. 31, 32 were terrible years. And of course, our tax revenues went down. And we believed in a balanced budget. When Roosevelt was elected president, he believed in the balanced budget. Everybody believed in a balanced budget. So the cabinet was like, oh, we need more revenue. So either we tax the rich, which we don't want to do, or why don't we put on tariffs? And so that's what they decided to do. So the Hartley-Smoot Act was come up. Now, Hoover wasn't even really for it. He was kind of like, back and forth. But the cabinet said, we got to do this. So he then said, okay, I'll sign it. And they signed in the tariffs. And what they weren't counting on, that people would retaliate against us. And of course, we started the Great Global Depression. Now, when I say that we believe in a balanced budget, Roosevelt was elected 32. And on his first day, he made liquor legal. And the second thing he did was he got rid of all the tariffs. But he still believed in the balanced budget. And if you go back, you'll see that 36 and 37 were second and third worst years of the Depression. And so what we did is he called in all the top dogs and he said, hey, we're getting ready for war. Look at Europe and everything. I want you to retool. And they said, okay, we'll do that, but we don't have the money. You have to give us the money or we're not going to retool. And so 1938, the U.S. government incurred a $10 billion deficit to fund the retooling of all our industries for war. And off took the economy. And for the next several generations, we believed that war was good for the economy. But it really wasn't. It was just that we should give liquidity to the market when it needs it. But that's another story. So on 8/4, we did a thing on Japan and what our tariffs did to put them in a tough position. And I didn't know then, and I still don't know today, how this is going to work out. But today, on the Asian Times front page, this was. So they say, Besant's got a blind spot, but read the second line. The U.S. Treasury cajoles the Bank of Japan to raise rates, which won't happen anytime soon, precisely because of Trump's tariffs. So Besant in paragraph 2 says they're behind the curve. So they're going to be hiking and they need to get their inflation problem under control. Look at our inflation today. And he also said today that we should be cutting our rates by 150 to 1.50 to 1.75. So I don't know what he's doing here, all right? But the article, now this is the Asian Times, they're saying Besant needs to get Trumponomics under control. Does he not understand that 4 months ago, BOJ Governor Ueda, which we talked about, he came in to normalize all their rates in their financial system there. And he was on track to raise the rates further away from zero. They're only 25 basis points, where they've been for 26 years, only to get derailed by Trump's tariffs. So So the last paragraph says, it's painfully obvious that the percent is up to here, trying to weaken the dollar via the Japanese monetary policy as the Federal Reserve Chair Powell slow walks U.S. rate cuts. Fair enough. But such comments are inspiring more eye rolling in Asia than intellectual debate among the BOJ policy. Now, here the article goes on to say, like we did on 8.4, I suggest you go back and listen to it because we go into depth. Their growth rate is only 0.7%. So they're raising their interest rates when they're barely growing. Their inflation rate, their wholesale price is at 2.6, but their inflation rate is 3.7 and going higher. Their food prices, I think, are up 14 to 16%, somewhere in that area. All right. So the 15% on the Japanese goods is going to slow down their economy. So you're slowing down the economy because we put on the tariffs, and then we say you should raise your rates because we want the dollar to go down versus the Japanese yen. So we can see the conundrum that we're putting our quote unquote allies in. We got Europe that we just slapped up, and Europe, as we know, we've discussed this many times, is really under the gun economically. They truly have not grown since COVID, okay? Fact is, I think they're down. And then you see the conundrum that we put Japan in, and, you know, they don't want to raise their rates, they'll tank their economy. But the one thing in going through the last two videos on the Moran paper that I realized is that the number one goal, and they're going to try to achieve it in multiple different ways, is they want the dollar to go down, the reserve currency to go down. Okay, that's the dollar. And they want other currencies to go up. And you heard what we said. They're going to sell the dollar, buy other currencies, sell gold, buy other currencies, um, tax the interest that we're paying to somebody. So they'll sell their reserve currency and buy their own currency. We're going to force conversion, term out, as I say. All these things is to drive down the dollar and to drive down the interest that we're paying on our debt, which is the largest part of our fiscal budget now, is interest. So they're determined to do this. So it's interesting that yesterday, well, let's say a couple of days ago, they came out and said Moran, who wrote the Moran paper, is going to be nominated to be onto the Fed, which would be the head of the Fed. We think, we said that, we don't know. But then yesterday, Trump issues out his 11 people that are being considered for the Fed job. And all I'll say is it's noticeable that Stephen Moran is not on there. Now, I don't know all these people. If you ask me, watching the Feds over the last few years, if it was me, I don't know a lot of these people, I'm going to be honest with you. But I would say Michelle Bowman or Bauman, the Fed Vice Chair for Supervision, I would vote for her, but no one's asking me. But the point is, Moran's not on there. So I thought about this, and here's what I think this is the answer to that. They're going to suggest very unorthodox ways of handling this situation, which we've been discussing, and they are highly unorthodox. We're not trying to do one, we're trying to do like 7 of them, and no one knows how they're going to work out. So the way I'm looking at this is when he said he was going to nominate Moran, I think behind the scenes there was a lot of pushback. And here's how I think it was thought about. If we're going to do a highly different way of handling the Fed and interest rates and the Treasury and the dollar and so forth and so on, that what you want is you want a normal guy, a strict person in there who's going to do what we'll call unorthodox action. If you put in someone who's unorthodox and does unorthodox action, I don't think that you will have many people in the world at a very comfortable level. And in fact is let's be honest, I would say the one job that I would not want right now is to be nominated and approved by Trump to be on the Fed, because you'll be just known as a creature of Trump. So what do we do? How do we handle our allies? What is Japan? Are we going to lose Japan over this? And what is Europe going to do? Because this is not over. Tell me in the comments and like and follow.